Well, there is a woman over the weekend who took it upon herself to research my family history in hopes of digging up some kind of a gotcha moment, a gotcha angle to validate illegal immigration and open borders. And what she found was really shocking, guys. She found that my family who came here in the 1800s from Norway and Germany, that they spoke Norwegian and German.
Okay.
And really what she did is prove that my family came here legally.
Tomi Lahren and Sonny Hostin just turned a heated political debate into a personal ancestry battle. Hostin called out Lahren on The View, exposing her family history and accusing her of hypocrisy. But how did Tomi Lahren respond? Did she fire back or stay silent?
Immigrants come over here and they don't know anything and they're dragging us down because we all come from immigrants, including you, Tomi Lahren.
She talks about low skills. What exactly are her skills?
Her second great-grandmother had been here for 10 years, yet spoke no English. Oh my God.
Sonny on her show, The View, decided to hit her with a history lesson, specifically Tomi's own family history. Hostin pointed out that Lahren's ancestors did not speak English when they first arrived in the US. Gasp! Can you believe it? Immigrants not speaking English right away? They weren't exactly waving an American flag and speaking perfect English when they first got here. But why did this even become a thing? Well, because the immigration debate in the US is already a powder keg, and it gets personal when you throw personal ancestry into the mix.
Really, what she did is prove that my family came here legally, but what she was hoping to do was try to call me a hypocrite for believing in merit-based immigration. Again, she failed miserably. But this really isn't what she calls resistance genealogy. It's just another indication of Trump derangement syndrome. But I really am happy, though, that she has such a fascination with my family history, and I'm hoping that she will take on Elizabeth Warren's next.
Now, before we start choosing sides and lighting up the comment section, let's actually break this down. It's about how America sees immigration, who gets to belong, and how history keeps coming back to bite people. So after Sonny Hostin basically called her out on live TV, Lahren fired back with a classic, nice try, but nope response. She made it clear that yes, her ancestors were immigrants, but they came here legally, which, in her book, makes all the difference. And according to her, they didn't sit around refusing to assimilate. They learned English, worked hard, and built a life without demanding handouts. She doubled down on the whole learning English argument, saying that speaking the language is key to fully assimilating and succeeding in America.
However, I do believe that the immigration crisis of today is apples to oranges from what it was in the 1800s when immigrants came to this country legally, were documented, worked for themselves, asked for nothing, and built a life and a family.
People were quick to point out that immigration policies were very different back then, and that assimilation isn't as black and white as she makes it seem. At its core, this whole issue isn't just about Tomi Lahren and Sonny Hostin throwing verbal punches over ancestry. It's about something way bigger: who gets to come to America, how they get here, and what's expected of them once they arrive. And of course, as with everything in politics, there are two very loud, very stubborn sides that can't seem to agree on anything. In the simplest terms, legal versus illegal immigration. Conservatives, Lahren included, tend to argue that they're not against immigration, they just want people to follow the law. Liberals, on the other hand, argue that the immigration system is broken and that comparing today's policies to the 1800s is like comparing a flip phone to an iPhone 15. Technically, they both make calls, but one of them is clearly outdated. They point out that immigrants, both legal and illegal, contribute to the economy, take jobs many Americans don't want, and, historically, have always faced discrimination before eventually being accepted. Yes, even the Irish, Italians, and Germans were once seen as outsiders who weren't American enough. And why is this issue such a heated one?
That has nothing to do with the illegal immigration crisis of today that we must deal with, but they don't want to acknowledge that.
Well, for starters, it's personal. Immigration isn't just about laws, it's about people, their families, and their livelihoods. For some, it's about safety and opportunity. For others, it's about fairness and security. And let's be real, Politicians from both parties love to use immigration as a political weapon. It's an easy way to fire up voters, whether it's talking about building a wall or abolishing ICE. The issue itself isn't new. Immigrants have always been a topic of controversy, but the modern political climate has made it even more explosive. So that makes you wonder how America has treated immigrants in different eras, right? Oh boy, America's history with immigrants is a roller coaster. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, millions of European immigrants came to the U.S. through places like Ellis Island. Were they all welcomed with open arms? Not exactly. Many were seen as threats to American jobs and culture. Sounds familiar? And laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 literally banned certain groups from coming in. Fast forward to the mid-1900s, and suddenly, immigrants from Latin America and Asia were the new targets of discrimination. Fast forward again to today, and we're still having the same debate, just with new faces. The rhetoric might change, but the core argument, who belongs here, hasn't. So,
whatsoever.
Did you provide them with DNA, 23andMe? Because I cannot believe the detail on your background that they were able to get.
Well, I don't have to. She did all the research for me, so I'm sure my family is very appreciative.
What about Joy saying, though, what are your skills? It's beyond research. It is personal. It is mean.
Are today's critics being hypocritical? Because let's be honest, many people slamming immigrants today are descendants of immigrants who weren't exactly welcomed with open arms when they first arrived. Lahren's ancestors, for example, came from Norway. And guess what? Back in the early 1900s, Scandinavian immigrants were mocked for not speaking English and seen as outsiders. But now, they're just considered American. The reality is, every wave of immigrants has faced pushback before eventually being accepted. It happened with Italians, Germans, the Irish, Asians, and Latinos. So when people say, my ancestors did it the right way, what they often don't mention is that their ancestors also faced discrimination, struggled to assimilate, and weren't exactly greeted with apple pie and American flags. At the end of the day, this debate isn't going anywhere. Immigration is one of those issues that people feel very strongly about, and it doesn't help that both political sides use it as a weapon to win elections. But if history tells us anything, it's that today's immigrants, just like past immigrants, will eventually become part of the American fabric. In a few decades, we'll probably be arguing about an entirely different group of people, and that, my friends, is the real American tradition. Apparently, this whole ancestry drama, in 2024, from your great-great-grandparents' immigration story, is now political ammunition. And unlike Lahren, Hostin's ancestry is a mix of Puerto Rican and African American heritage. And while Puerto Ricans have technically been U.S. citizens since 1917, thanks to the Jones-Shafroth Act, that hasn't exactly shielded them from the whole, are they really American? debate. See, Puerto Rico is in this weird limbo where it's part of the U.S., but not a state, meaning its residents are citizens but don't have the same voting rights as mainland Americans. And while Spanish is widely spoken there, English proficiency varies, a fact that has fueled debates over identity, assimilation, and, yep, who counts as American. So when Hostin pointed out that Lahren's ancestors didn't come to the U.S. as English-speaking, red-blooded, flag-waving patriots, she was basically calling out the hypocrisy. Her point? If Lahren's own family took time to assimilate, why the double standard for today's immigrants?
Well, of course, this is classical Joy Behar, but I would like to ask Joy Behar what her skills are, because perhaps we could swap stories. I know I watch Joy, and she seems like a highly skilled lady, but for her to attack me, that's really interesting. Those in glass houses should not throw stones.
Meanwhile, one of the things, the New York Times has this headline.
And was it fair to drag their ancestries into this argument? Well, to be honest, I think yes and no. On one hand, Lahren made immigration and assimilation her hill to die on. She's been vocal about the idea that immigrants should immediately integrate, speak English, and contribute. So, When it turned out that her own ancestors took their sweet time doing just that, you can see why people found that hilarious. It's like a cell phone she walked right into. But on the other hand, how far back are we really willing to go with this? At what point do we stop holding people accountable for their ancestors' choices? It's one thing to call out hypocrisy, but does it really prove anything about someone's stance today? We've had our fun, but let's zoom out for a second. Does personal ancestry shape political opinions? Well, it should, right? If your ancestors had to struggle, fight discrimination, and take decades to assimilate, wouldn't that make you more empathetic to today's immigrants? Not necessarily. Some people take their family's hardships as proof that new immigrants should do it the right way, just like their ancestors did, conveniently forgetting that the right way was different back then. Others, like Hostin, see these struggles as a reason to be more understanding of immigrants today. In politics, if you have a past, or, in this case, if your ancestors had a past, someone will use it against you. This isn't new. We've seen politicians' old tweets, yearbook photos, and college essays come back to haunt them. Now, apparently, your great-great-grandparents' immigration papers are fair game too. But here's the thing. If we start judging people entirely based on their ancestry, where does it end? Should every politician be required to submit a full family tree before debating immigration policy? It's a slippery slope, and at some point, we need to separate personal history from policy discussions. So, what did we learn from this whole mess? Well, besides the fact that Twitter loves a good ancestry scandal, we saw how personal history and political beliefs can clash in the most dramatic ways.